Here we go.
Hello, everyone. I think we are officially live again. So excited to welcome you all for this next Nib and Inkfest event we have running. I am still, despite everything, Joan Zahra Dark, your host for today's roundup of Nib and Ink events. Excuse me. Uh, I am so excited to welcome you all to Melodrama or Melo/Drama, a dramatic tension workshop. I think this is going to be a really great one. If you're following along in the Zoom chat again, you can take a look at captions and the transcript that is running to keep an eye on that and can save that upon request as well. And yeah, I think we're gonna just hop right in here. Should be a really great one. Introducing our speaker, Rivkah LaFille is the author slash illustrator of the Yeltsin nominated series Steady Beat, as well as the forthcoming creative writing with Miss Mary Mack from First Second, coming in fall 2025, and Five Wishes from Candlewick, coming in fall 2026. She has been teaching the craft of making great comics for over 20 years, including the Kids Comics Intensive at Kids Comic Unite. Rivka, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Joan. It's great to be here, and I'm so excited to be with you guys. Been looking forward to this. And as usual, I'm nervous. I have taught for years, done workshops for years, and it actually doesn't get any easier, any less nerve-wracking. So I'm going to let people kind of filter in for another minute. I'm going to start here about 6:05. But I have a question for you guys. I would like to know, what is a comic you've read lately that really kept you on the edge of your seat? Not just a great comic, a comic that made your heart race. I want to hear. You can unmute yourself if you'd like to share, raise your hand, or you can put it in the chat and I will read it aloud. And we're going to discuss this a little bit. Like I want to see some of your choices. Feel free to sit and think about it a little bit. When I Arrived at the Castle by Emily Carroll. I love Emily Carroll. Are there any other Emily Carroll fans here? She's been around for quite a while. I think most of us are probably pretty familiar with her. Oh, yes. And Joan says, if you'd like to hop on the mic, raise your hand because you won't be able to unmute yourself. They'll have to unmute you. Oh, thank you. And it was just corrected that they now go by E.M. Carroll and they, them. Thank you. I didn't realize that. So I would like to know, Sam, are you willing to share? How do you think this book by E.M. Carroll, When I Arrived at the Castle, what about it made your heart race, kept you on the edge of your seat? And it actually, Mel just shared the summer Hikaru died. I would also love to hear why you think these books affected you the way they did. Was it a particular scene? Was it the story itself? Was it the art? What made your heart pound? And everyone who's kind of sitting here thinking about a book that really made your heart elevated, that got you excited, that had tension in it, right? What was it about that book that made you feel so strongly? So Sam says, definitely the formatting. I think it all blended together beautifully. And we see the formatting. Do you mean like the way that the panels were laid out, or do you mean the actual like physical tacticality of the book? Jesse brought up After God was a book that got them going. So Sam says the panels or lack thereof on certain pages. Okay, so what's important is that all of you are thinking. I want you guys kind of thinking about these books and remember the books that you've thought of that have popped into your head as we go through this. And as I go through this workshop, and talk about all the different techniques that we can use to create dramatic tension, I want you to think about the books that you've read that have created this effect in you and the different effects that they use and the techniques that they use as we go through. So let's go ahead and get ready. Let's get started. So, what is dramatic tension and why would we want it? Think of dramatic tension as the emotional pressure we apply to readers through our books. When we create tension, we engage our readers in the emotions of the story so that they can more deeply connect to our characters' personal narratives. It's a way of applying pressure on people's emotions, on their feelings, so that they actually feel for the characters in books. So, what kinds of books would we do this in? Well, honestly, everything. Anything from drama, romance, comedy, science fiction and fantasy, memoir, biography, historical, and even nonfiction. Yes, nonfiction uses dramatic tension too. Now, let's say you did an info comic and you weren't trying to connect emotionally with the reader, then maybe you don't need to care about this as much. But even a lot of nonfiction books use emotional tension, dramatic tension. So, how do we actually create dramatic tension in comics? And how do we meter it? Now, what do I mean when I say meter? So, meter is raising something higher, raising something lower. Not only do you want to create dramatic tension, you also want to be able to control it. Like, there will be times in a scene you want to create high drama, a very intense, sort of either negative or positive emotion. And there are times you're going to want to actually reel it in. So, how do we do this? Well, I'm going to talk about three ways. Now, they're not only three ways, just the three major ways that major approaches that you can use to control dramatic tension, to create it and meter it in your stories. First, script. Script is plot, story, dialogue, right? This is the story you actually create on paper before you start drawing anything. Next, acting. So I don't like to refer to the secondary stage of making comics of the art. As in this context, we're going to refer to the art as acting because we're thinking about the characters. We're not thinking about the way at this point that we're drawing everything. We're thinking about how our characters are acting because you can use stick figures to draw and still make it feel emotional. So we're not going to talk about artistic technique. We're going to talk about drawn acting techniques that we can use with our characters to get high emotion versus low emotion, lots of tension, and design, the actual layout and design of your comic. How do the sizes of your frames, the layouts of your frames, your dialogue balloons, how do all of these things affect dramatic tension? So obviously, like I said, there are more ways to create and meter dramatic tensions, but I'm only going to address what I feel are the biggest and most essential ones today. So script. Let's start with script. And excuse me if I reach for my water a lot. I'm actually a little sick. So if I stop occasionally and blow my nose, just ignore it. So let's start with emotional variability. What is emotional variability? Emotional variability is what it sounds like, the range of emotions in your comic. So I've got a bunch of comics panels up here. We have in Snapdragon by Kat Lay, it's upper left panel, this very sort of angry looking character. The next character from Lucy Knisley's Stepping Stones looks kind of timid and shy. And Jillian and Mariko Tamaki's This One's Summer, the character has this sort of almost like laughingly skeptical look. So in all these panels, there's a range of emotion. And this is really important in comics and in writing your script and in writing your stories. Stories that contain too much of the same kind of emotion at the same level of intensity, that's your meter, often become prone to emotional flatness. So what do I mean by that? So here's a stupid little comic I drew up for you guys. Oh no, my dog died. Rip. Oh no, my wife died. Rip. Oh no, my cow died. Rip. Oh no, I'm a drunk now. Oh no, I died. The problem here, so look at this, like we might think of somebody dying in a comic as being incredibly dramatic, but if somebody is literally dying in every single scene and every single panel, like you have the same, it's the same sort of emotional intensity, the same type of emotion, the reader actually starts to grow accustomed to it. It stops losing its impact. When our stories feel flat, it can also be tempting to simply increase intensity. So in this example, we've left same emotion through the whole story. This is the whole story, right? Everybody died. And the intensity is the same. Like it didn't get any more intense. It never got any less intense or any more intense. So what happens if you just want to increase the intensity of your story? Well, let me show you what happens. If all we do is increase intensity, aliens blew up my house. And then the next panel, aliens blew up my town. And then my country, my planet, my universe. Things are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I honestly, this to me is a lot of superhero movies. I don't watch enough now to actually say that for a fact because I haven't watched one in a really long time. But action movies, right? This is a lot of action movies start with action and the action gets more and more intense and it just keeps more and more tense. And eventually people's eyes start to glaze over. When we rely too heavily on intensity, you can risk creating a story that tends towards the melodramatic. Melodrama is great for humor. So that's where like a panel like this, if you're going for a humorous effect, that's awesome. But what if you're going for a story that feels more realistic, that's a little more down to earth, right? You want to create intensity, you want drama, but do you really want melodrama? If you want melodrama, and that is the point, then go ahead. Just increasing intensity is actually a great way to do that. But what if you want something that feels more natural? So readers have a tendency to adapt and adjust to the status quo feeling in a story. Status quo is that sort of what we adjust to, the middle of the road, the thing that everyone is sort of used to, right? So instead of relying on increasing intensity, try adding more variability. So if you haven't read Raina Telgemeyer's Smile, you should. And I'm going to let you guys know, because I teach adults how to write for kids, a lot of my examples are going to be in the children's genre sphere, but all of these techniques, everything I talk about can be applied to any genre. So Raina Telgemeyer's Smile is the overall theme in the story is her dealing with several years worth of dental drama, which is overall a fairly negative and stressful experience. So you can see my graph here. There's sort of emotional positive and then emotional negative. When you start the story, it's kind of this sort of baseline right in the middle. And then she has this horrible accident that shoves her teeth up into her mouth. And the rest of the story is all this drama spanning several years until finally at the end, her smile is fixed. Now, drama's not enough, right? We need more. If this story was only about Raina's journey, her dental drama journey, it would have gotten very boring very quickly, but she actually made this a life journey. She adds variability. Throughout this experience, Raina gets her ears pierced. She falls and crush. She lives through a major earthquake, discovers her love of Disney, graduates from middle school and begins high school. She stands up for herself to old friends and makes new ones. And she also explores her interest in love and art. So Raina rarely stays over long in this sort of net negative or net positive state. She shifts between these states. So she never develops an emotional status quo, right? That's so important. You want your characters to constantly be moving from negative to positive to negative to positive again. And what that does is that sort of the difference between a negative state to a positive state, that creates tension. If you linger too long in a single state, positive or negative, you establish a status quo, and that's when your readers are going to start to lose interest. So emotional variability keeps readers constantly moving, which in turn creates greater and more dynamic tension within a story than relying on intensity alone. So you can turn up the intensity. You'll notice, like in this graph, when the characters on the upper part where it's emotionally positive, those moments I kind of rated a little more positive, a little less positive. You can see at the end, actually, her greatest difference is at the very end, where she has one big kind of negative slash positive experience and then one really positive experience. So you actually still want to think about intensity, but you don't have to dial up the intensity quite as much when you also rely on variability. Some other stories, some other books that do a really good job at this. Laura Dane Keeps Breaking Up With Me by Mariko Tamaki and Rosemary Valero O'Connell. This is a wonderful book. This is like, I use this book for creating dramatic tension more than any other book, because Rosemary Valero O'Connell is an absolute genius when it comes to creating dramatic tension through storytelling, through panel layouts, through colors, through design. But if you look here, like the main character, Freddie, she's constantly ricocheting between moments of love, of self-hate, inner doubt, of caring for friends and abandoning those she cares for. And this is because of the writing, by the way. It's already starts with amazing script and has amazing art. Mariko Tamaki understands that characters need to bounce back and forth between love and betrayal, between lust and disgust. They're constantly moving. And it doesn't have to be, this emotional variability doesn't have to be from scene to scene. It can also be within scenes. So in this scene from Bloom by Kevin Panetta and Savannah Ganucheau, one of the characters, the main character, almost falls off the roof, and his crush catches him. He keeps him from falling off. And the dramatic tension here of almost falling off the roof, contrasted by being saved by the person the main character has a crush on, creates this incredible dramatic tension. This scene, if they'd just gone up to the roof and then gone to this, laying down, it would have felt a little different. Like there still would have been some romantic tension here. But because we threw in this moment where the main character, one of the characters, almost falls off, suddenly you have this negative to this positive. That jump from negative to positive feels so much greater. It makes our heart start beating, right? And I love that. So another thing, so in Bloom, this happens in a lot of books, but this is a good example from Bloom. Within scenes, you can have variability. You can even have variability within frames. So this is a really cool panel. And I love this because the foreground versus the background, like what are the people doing in the foreground, right? They're partying. It looks like it's a wedding, right? And in the background, from in this panel, we see our main character sitting by himself with headphones in, isolated. Immediately we feel a sense of loneliness. Now, imagine this panel if it was just the character sitting by himself, or just the characters in the foreground dancing. Because we have this juxtaposition between a positive emotion and a negative emotion, it makes his character's loneliness so much greater. It's a beautiful way. It's like the first page of Bloom. It's wonderful. So someone who does this really well and who does emotional variability really well. And I recommend, if you want to study this, Ai Yazawa, who wrote Paradise Kiss and illustrated Neighborhood Story, Nana. One of the reasons I think her books are so incredibly timeless and resonate with so many people is because if you read her stories, every scene, the character's emotions are constantly shifting. There are times a character has had this sort of horrible, dramatic thing happen, and then like the person they love ends up kissing them. There is an intensity because of that contrast, and it's happening all over the place. Like every other panel is this emotional ricochet. It's amazing. I've seen everyone pointing out Parakiss, Nana. I love these books. They're all great. And Neighborhood Story is now in English. It's awesome. It's taken forever to get it over here, so you should read it. Anyway, these are great case studies. So moving on from variability is sort of this high contrast climax. This is similar to emotional variability, but we're getting to the climax of the story. How do you maximize the climax of your story for absolute high tension drama? Well, in order to fall off the cliff, you must first climb the mountain. Bloom. So we have waited 280 pages for these two characters to kiss. It has taken them forever. Like, this is a wonderful moment. I love this point in the story. I'm like, yay, I'm cheering for them. I'm excited. And then you see on the bottom, they've left a towel hanging by the oven, and it starts catching fire, and they start getting hot and heavy. And literally their bakery that this main character's dad owns burns down. So major high, major low. And by the way, this is not sort of like old sort of fiction. There was a lot of gay punishment for people sort of um uh falling in love with someone of the same sex. This book does not do that, by the way. They actually end up going through a major story arc afterwards and kind of repairing their relationship. And what happens, the importance of this scene, what's really important about this scene is less that it drives a wedge between these two characters for a temporary time or that it burns down the bakery. The importance of this scene is that it brings the main character and his father finally to an understanding. The father realizes how much his son, the boy that he's falling in love with, how much they meant to each other. And he realizes that his son, he's been taking him for granted for so long. He wanted his son to run the bakery, to take it over. The son wants to leave. There's all this background drama that comes to a head in this scene. But the drama is so much greater because these two characters are finally sort of consummating their relationship, finally admitting to each other how much they care for each other, and the bakery burns down, literally. So he went to the mountain and he fell off the cliff. But it makes it a very potent scene, and that's what it does. It's the climax of the story. There's still a lot of resolution afterwards. And the resolution's even greater because we have that inverse. So let me explain that to you. We went high in order to go low, but now if you want to make a character's emotional fall truly epic, try to push that character to the top as far as possible first. And the same holds true in reverse. If you want your character to rise to epic heights, first give them a low as deep as Hades. And so this character in Bloom, he's burnt his bakery down, his parents' bakery down. But that becomes a contrast for the inverse climax, the resolution with his father, where they finally kind of come to terms with each other, where his father kind of learns to let go, to let his son be himself. So he had to go high, to go low, to go high again. This is that climax, right? The end of the story. And Snapdragon by Catley. By the way, anything Catley makes is wonderful. Thirsty Mermaids is one of my favorites. So always recommend their stories. And the climax for Snapdragon, the main character, Snap, is opening the door and her mom's ex-boyfriend has come in. He's this kind of, honestly, semi-abusive boyfriend. He's a jerk. He's a jerk, let's just say it. And he wants his dog back. And what he does, so the struggle for Snap in this story is she's trying to master magic, but her teacher is kind of trying to teach her a right way, right? Versus her way. And the story is she has to learn what her way is. And so as this guy is trying to take her dog back, he sicks his two pit bulls on her. High drama. This is like, oh my God, mom's like, Snap. She thinks her kid's about to die, right? Like about to get mauled, essentially. And that's when her magic finally comes alive. It's an amazing scene. Like I got chills reading it. And because of that, because of this high, sort of very low pit that she goes into where she's in mortal danger, it kind of awakens her powers and it makes the awakening of her powers so much more powerful. Like you can feel the tension here, right? So, what's another way we can add emotional tension to a story? There's so many ways. Character dynamics. Did you know you can add tension just by the way that you write your characters? So, in Be Prepared by Vera Brosgol. So, what we have here in the middle is the main character. This is Vera. This is a memoir. And the lines that I have here are the different major characters in this story that she interacts with. So we have the camp counselor, we have, I think this girl's name is Kara, her brother, her mom, these two girls, Sasha and Sasha. They're both Sashas. And we all know Sashas are like Karens. So they're trouble. We have this boy here. Oh, I can't remember his name. Gregor and Alexei. So each of these characters, not only are they different from each other, like they're all different enough in their personalities and their characters traits to be unique. Something you want to think of when you have secondary characters is What are the traits they bring out of your main character that you want to show your audience? So this is really important if you're writing memoir, right? If you're writing memoir, maybe you want to leave out a particular character. Um, Maybe there are people in your life in that memoir you want to leave out because it's not a trait that you want to show to your readers. And the same thing in fiction, right? So the camp counselor is this sort of person that wants her to confide in her, but it shows her resistance. Kira brings out some of the best in her, shows a side of the main character that's very tender. Her brother is sort of her opposite. Everything he wants, she wants the opposite. Whatever she wants, he wants the opposite. Her mother is someone that makes her feel vulnerable. We see a lot of her vulnerability around her mother, her feeling like she's maybe not good enough. Sasha and Sasha, honestly, they bring out her worst traits. They are two people that she's bunking with that make her want to copy them, to emulate them. But their personalities are they're they're Karens. They're Sashas. They're horrible people. They're mean, they're petty, they're the bad girls in the story, right? So they bring out a lot of the main character's worst traits. Now, Gregor is an interesting character because he brings out a side of Vera that is at times compassionate and at times petty. And what it does is there's a scene where she laughs at him. She calls him tit head because he's got like a hornet's bite on his forehead. And then someone overhears it and everyone starts calling him tit head. And then she joins in like, you're better than this. Like she should be better than this, but she ends up kind of following the group. But later she kind of realizes her mistake and she helps him. Actually, she like points out a little mud spot that he had lost his shoe and she's like assisting him. It shows that she is a redeemable character. She is capable of cruelty, but she's also capable of kindness. And the last character, Alexei, he's just like the bully in the story, right? He's the good looking guy that everyone else is swooning over, and she's like, I don't see it, which tells you a little bit about her tastes and her interests in other people. So when you're writing up your character and you're writing your secondary characters, think about what you want your secondary characters to say and what kind of tension you want to draw out of those characters through their dynamics. Strong and distinctive character dynamics will make it easier to extract a full emotional range from your main characters. This is one of the reasons a lot of stories like Disney, there's often a sidekick, right? Or they're traveling with somebody. It's very rare that you get a story where someone's traveling alone, especially if it's a story where you need dialogue, right? In prose, sure, you can get inside the character's head, right? People argue with themselves all the time. But on screen or in comics, often you need characters to create dialogue in order to create these dynamics, in order to bring out this full emotional range, which creates tension. Just by having these characters present, natural tension will come. Hopefully this all makes sense so far. You're welcome to ask questions in the chat. I do keep an eye on chat. I do see Zena Wallace's, so you would say it's a balancing act then, like a tightrope. And I think you're referring to the script earlier. It's an interesting way to put it when you're thinking about script. I would say it's more like climbing mountains and falling into peaks. It's constantly going up and down and up and down. You can go as high as you want. You can go as low as you want. As long as you're having that variability, right? So let's talk about the last part of script that I think is really important when it comes to creating dramatic tension and metering it. Native versus manufactured tension, or you can call it built-in tension if you prefer that. So native tension are traits that are built into a story's characters or setting that simply by existing generate conflict. So for example, An Allergic by Megan Wagner Lloyd and Michelle Nutter. The native tension in this story is the fact that the main character is allergic to most animals. This isn't something that came into the story. This is something that was born inherent in the story. It's a character trait. So let's contrast this to manufactured tension. Manufactured tension is conflict that is introduced to a story by an external source. This is tension that comes in via plot, essentially. So in Awkward, the manufactured tension is the competition between two clubs. and the theft of one of the club's inventions. This is something that is introduced. It's not part of the characters, it's not part of the setting, it is a plot point. So, something that's really interesting though is both of these stories have both native built-in tension as well as manufactured tension. Um, and allergic, the manufactured tension is that she really, really wants a pet, and her, and it's like that is she's already allergic, right? That's the native tension. The manufactured tension is that she's decided she wants a pet. Well, right there, you have tension. Like that is your plot. You know, the character wants a pet and she can't have one. And so the rest of the story sort of naturally unfolds. This creates this kind of interplay between the two types of tension, built-in tension and manufactured tension, can make the tension feel very natural. And the same thing in awkward. Awkward revolves primarily around the manufactured tension, right? Which is the competition between these two clubs. But it also has native tension, and that's in the form of the main character's social anxiety. She's awkward. That's why it's called awkward. And it's kind of funny because the focus in the story is on the manufactured tension, and it's the main character's awkwardness and her social anxiety that makes the manufactured tension more tense. If she wasn't awkward, if she wasn't socially anxious, that manufactured tension would feel less deep, it would feel less immediate, and it would feel less tense, right? So we need both. And something that's really interesting is you can have manufactured tension turn into built-in tension. And Smile, the main character, damages her teeth. This is an incident that happens at the beginning of the story, is the character falls and she injures her mouth. But as the story goes, that manufactured tension becomes built-in tension. So you end up having this play between the built-in, the sort of built-in story that becomes part of the main storyline, all the rest of the things that she kind of encounters, fighting with her friends, getting bullied at school, the earthquake, they bounce off of this extra tension, and you see that it just feels very natural. Same thing, the impending blindness of Billy Scott. It opens with the main character, Billy Scott, getting into a fight, and it ends up she's going blind. You know, by the end of the book, she's gonna be blind. And the story doesn't linger in that. And that's what's amazing about this book. It's a beautiful book. I highly recommend it because it shows a story that could be inherently very depressing and very sad, especially for us artists. It's actually very beautiful and very uplifting because she introduces more the blindness, impending blindness starts manufactured, but it becomes built in as the writer introduces other types of manufactured story via other characters. So she meets all these different people that she starts drawing portraits of. And it's these people that she interacts with who find out either she's going blind or that she isn't. And she's kind of figuring out what she's going to do in the last 2 weeks of vision of seeing and what she's going to do after that. It's that interplay between the built-in, what becomes the built-in tension, and the tension of the people she meets is really beautiful. Another great example. So many stories benefit from having both native and manufactured tension. Native tension can help to make the manufactured tension feel more natural and believable, while manufactured tension gives a story greater momentum than native tension alone. So native tension makes it feel natural and believable. That's what's built into the characters, right? Into the setting. And the manufactured tension gives momentum to the story. You want both, ideally. So, and that is, by the way, I have critiqued a lot of scripts, and a lot of people are often really good at the manufactured tension. A lot of people writing scripts, writing out plot, writing out story, tend to focus on then what you call the inciting event, right? I'm not a huge fan of that word, but that is some ways that people like to refer to that incident, like a major incident at the beginning of the story that changes everything, right? I like to call it catalyst. It's like more of a scientific term, I guess. But it's a plot point that changes the course of history for this character. And so what I see in a lot of scripts is a focus on this manufactured tension, on plot, but forgetting, how can I put natural tension in here that bounces off of the manufacture tension, the plot. You think about it in story, think about it in setting, think about it in the ambiance of what surrounds the characters. How can you add that? That will create natural tension. So let's move on to acting. Acting's fun because acting happens in the script, it happens in art, it happens in layouts. So let's talk specifically about how our characters act on the page, facial expressions, and body language. So there is a time for exaggeration. I'll let you guys look at this for a little bit. There's a lot of panels. I was not able to put every single reference in this. Most of these are reference. If you want I can actually include my references later if you want. I can in the chat or online on Discord if you would like them. I just ran out of space. But look at all these faces here. Very expressive, exaggerated body language, full, huge range of emotions, right? So there is a time for this type of expressivism, but there's a time for subtlety too, right? There's a time when you want it to take it down a notch, when you want your character to have sort of a blank face, sort of a blank stare, calm body language. I've noticed a lot of artists, and this isn't everyone, but it can be easy to be tempted to turn the emotional dials up too high. See that a lot, especially with a lot of people kind of just getting started with drawing comics. There's a lot of tendency to want to make every gesture extreme, every facial expression, especially really extreme. There's a lot to be said for subtlety. Sometimes you want the emotional dials up, especially with comedy. With comedy, you actually kind of want that humorous, melodramatic effect where you just want the big, exaggerated facial expressions, right? You want to overemphasize. Wonderful for comedy. But perhaps ironically, for more dramatic stories, often less is more. I would love to challenge you guys to find the books, your graphic novels on your bookshelves, and make two stacks. Make one that put on one stack one that has more comedy, and on the other stack one that has a tends to focus on the drama. And then I want you to flip through it. Look at the facial expressions, look at the body language. Notice who turns the dials up and when, and who turns that emotional dial down and when. So why is this? So, example. This was Our Pact by Ryan Andrews. Beautiful book. This is a very intense moment. So these two boys have been cycling down the street. They've exchanged. One of them has offered them Rice Krispies. The other one's denied. Like, nah, I don't want your Rice Krispies, even though you were like my best friend like 20 years ago. Well, 10 years ago. And they come upon a bear with a giant basket on his back. Look at these characters. So first of all, the two boys up top, all we see are their eyes. Like the framing here is awesome. It's like they're almost peeking over the side of the frame, kind of afraid. But their eyes are not expressive. Their faces are kind of blank. And then below, you see this bear. He's just kind of standing there. There's the body language is just standing, right? And there's a little bit of wind, right? With the scarf. Very understated. Now, we're gonna come back to this panel, but just notice for now, because we're going to see actually several pages after this later in the story, why this is such a dramatic scene. But this just know right here, they're afraid. In This One Summer by Mariko Tamaki and Jillian Tamaki, this is a book that uses a lot of very understated body language. And book has a lot of very serious themes. It's about unwanted pregnancy. It's about miscarriage. It's about talking potentially about abortion, about owning up to one's mistakes. But it's all told through the eyes of the main character, who is a young girl who's, I actually don't know how old she is, maybe like 12 or 13. And she's experiencing other people's drama by overhearing them, by being around it. And so it's kind of like she floats around other people's dramas. And this sort of satellite effect around other people's globes, it's actually really effective that the storytelling in This One Summer is kind of pulled back in the camera, in the body language. It's very understated. And honestly, it makes this story feel so much more tense because you're constantly thinking, like, what are these characters really thinking? The artist never tells you what these characters are thinking. They leave it up to the reader. And Frizzy by Claribel A. Ortega and Rose Posama, another great book. I love Rose. Rose is a wonderful artist. Follow her, follow them on Instagram. Um, they this middle panel here. So the main character and her mother have been at odds throughout this whole story. A lot of it over hair, but it's also about identity, right? It's about being able and being unafraid to be yourself. And her mom's been forcing her into this mold. So you see her mom cross herself, click off the light. This character in the middle, I love this shot. She's just laying in bed. She has a semi anxious expression on her face, and she's got her hands clutched a little, but it's not. This is an incredibly tense scene, especially when you've led up to it from the rest of the story. This may be one of the most tense moments for this character in this entire book. And her body language is so understated here. And I love it because the reader is sort of like, there are times where you're so overwhelmed with feeling, you almost just like freeze up, right? It's like that to me is what that moment feels like. And the mom says, we have to try to look our best. And then we kind of see just a little bit of the expression of this girl, a little bit of worry, and it's it's like, how do you express that tension? Like, she could be on her side, like face scrunched, like, but she's not, because she doesn't need to be. And there are other moments in the story where she is highly expressive, but none of them feel as anxious as this scene. Zena Wallace just pointed out, love how the mom's face is partly covered when she talks too, which I love you point that out, because when we're actually going to talk about panel clipping later, because that is also an awesome way to increase dramatic tension. All right, subtle acting leaves more room for reader interpretation. Choosing subtlety imposes an aura of reality and believability. So if you're going for a story that feels more real, you want it to feel believable, right? You want people to suspend their disbelief, right? Subtlety, definitely try to uh, veer towards subtlety. That will achieve it. So, what about pacing and delivery? So, when I say pacing and delivery, I'm referring to the acting, by the way, because pacing can mean a lot of things in comics. But right now, we're specifically discussing the acting in the story, how the actors deliver their lines, their pauses, right? Everything in between. So, this is going to take us into design. But first, I want you guys to read the next 6 pages. It's going to be 3 spreads. So, silently read this page to yourself, and in about a minute, I will skip to the next one and then the next. And I want you to be conscious as you're reading of the way you read the panel, the pacing, the dialogue, the acting, the pauses, right? So, you ready? We can go ahead and go now. And some of you let me know when you get to the end of the page. It's just one big spread. All done? Let me know in the chat. Excellent. So I'm going to go through and read this aloud. I'm going to try to deliver it at the pace that I'm hearing it when I read. So, and I'll maybe describe some of the panels every now and then. So we see, first of all, this is not quite a breakup scene between two girls, Laura Dean and Freddie, but one of them is finally confronting the other. And the first person is in pink is Laura Dean. The other character is Freddie. So I guess I was there last night. Yep. And I guess you were there too. Yeah. Were you like trying to hurt me, making out with them? No, of course not. So you just got caught up in the moment. Yeah. So do you want to break up with me? You know, every time we break up, we always get back together because we have this thing, because you get me and I get you. And we get that that's more important than some stupid kiss, right? I love this scene because it's got delivery. Listen to that delivery. Be aware of how your characters speak and where their pauses are. So much of acting is in the way dialogue is delivered rather than just what was said. It's very easy when we're writing a script. If you're more of a writer than an artist, I am more of a writer, I'll admit, than an artist. I didn't think of the story first, but I think visually too. Um, it can be tempting to just write out everything in dialogue. It's tempting to drive tension entirely through dialogue or entirely through visuals, right? If you're primarily an artist, you're thinking, oh, what are the cool visuals that I'm making? How can I make this look amazing and really powerful? But think of your characters as acting. What are their pauses, right? Good humor often is you listen to a comedian, right? And pay attention to the pauses, right? So find a comedian that you really like and listen to them and don't listen to what they're saying. Pay attention to the length of pauses because pauses are a major part of delivery because pauses build tension. You can make a pause too long and then you actually lose your audience and you lose tension. You can make it too short and people talk too fast and you lose any tension whatsoever. So the length of a pause can create tension. So how do we actually do that? How do we create tension through pauses? Well, this is where we get into design. So this is one of those things where acting and design crossover. We're going to talk about tension pauses. Tension pauses are added panels, actions, or space that prolong a pause for the purpose of increasing emotional tension. So in these next scenes, I'm going to use a lot of Laura Dean keeps breaking up with me because it Rosemary Valero O'Connell uses these techniques a lot. They are masterful at creating dramatic tension pauses. So we have this scene where the main character is talking to this woman at a concession stand. And you see the character kind of like she's reaching up for something and says, did someone break up with you or something? And notice how the balloon has this long tail and it overlays the person she's talking to. And then look at the bottom. Pause, pause. Those are tension pauses. Those are there because you're thinking, wait, why is this person not responding? Because she doesn't know how to respond, right? So that's that's one of the ways that you create a tension pause is just by creating an extra panel, right? You can have the character turning their head, maybe they're lifting something. This type of tension pause, we use panels. So when you add an extra panel to create an extra beat that creates a pause. A lot of that in this book. So tension pauses are part of your character's acting. They're also part of layout and design because you can also use art to create tension pauses. So in The Impending Blindness of Billy Scott by Zoe Thorogood, we have this panel here. It says, damn, this is annoying. Pause. I guess I'll wait until tomorrow for them to clear up. Notice Zoe does this a lot in this book. They break up the dialogue, put the art in the middle, and then more dialogue. And what this does is it creates a tension pause between what she's thinking. She's not saying anything, she's thinking, but we're still reading it. We're still reading her thoughts, right? Next panel. 3 days, pause. They're still here. Like if they're still here had been placed over here on the left, 3 days, they're still here. This panel, this flow would feel so much more, so different. You would have her thinking 3 days, they're still here, and then a reveal. But instead, we have 3 days. Oh God, these spots that have appeared in her eye. I'm feeling like tension just looking at the picture, which is evoking an emotional response in me, just looking at the picture. they're still here. And we do this a lot in real life where we're thinking and then we look at something and then we're thinking or we think or we're talking and then we make an expression and then we say something else, right? You can use art to create a tension pause. You can also use space between dialogue balloons. We use this, Zoe Thorogood, you does this a lot too. So look at this. My name is Billy Scott. I am an artist and I am blind. Pause. Last year, I won a competition that allowed me the privilege of displaying my work here in this gallery. However, that happened to coincide with the start of my impending blindness. So what Zoe's done here is these first two lines, they're two balloons, but they're merged balloons, right? So it reads kind of quickly, but then there's this little pause. You hear it, right? You can hear it in your head, in the delivery, in the acting of the character. And I love that. And Zoe does this a lot. On this next page, one of the characters is singing a song to Billy as she has a blindfold on. And as you read the words, and I apologize, it's too small here. It's a big, beautiful, full page spread. You look at the length of the tails, right? There's this long tail, and it's deliberately, as you read it, you start to hear the length of the pause based on the length of the tail. And there's even this really long tail at the bottom wrapped up with a little bit of a finish. I love this. I'll be honest, I do this a lot in my own books. The one I'm working on now, I started to play with it a lot. And I love how dialogue balloon tail lengths, and especially when you're connecting dialogue balloons, can create this really like, you can really control the delivery of your characters. And so when they have those tension pauses, put in a little break there between balloons, right? You can also use the space within the frame itself to create a tension pause. When Billy finds out she's going blind, the doctor's saying, "You're going blind." Now, what's happening here, our tension pause is the space of the panel itself. This is a full page. Look at all this space around this balloon. It's one panel, it's a very large panel, and all this space here, what it does, the reader looks at us and they read, "You're going blind." But you don't move immediately onto another panel because it's a large page, because it's a full page, which means you have to turn the page. You're going to linger that 1 or 2 few seconds longer, which creates extra tension. And by the way, page turns are also a tension pause. Forgot to include them in here. Your longest tension pause is gonna be a page turn, which is why there's a bit of advice. Always end every page on a cliffhanger, even if it's a mini cliffhanger, because that's where you want your longest pause to come after. You get that tension going. So you can also use centering to create tension pauses. We have Laura Dean here, centered on the page. Centering is kind of interesting because it makes a character feel powerful. When you center a character straight on and there's that symmetry, you create a sense of power in that character. Even though this character is in a moment of like pretend vulnerability, you've also kind of elevated her. Like all the focus is on this character. There's all this beautiful sort of negative white space around them. It creates a pause, the white space, and that sort of weighting that character right there in the middle. It's almost like a magnet for your eye. Like your eye wants to go in the middle of the page and actually has a problem almost escaping the page, right? You've centered it and your eye's like, no, I want to stay here. It's kind of a weird little like visual effect when you center things. It's a magnet, it's an eye magnet. You can also use excessive off-centering to create long pauses. So here we have this hand and this like, it's on a bed sheet and you look at the hand and even look at the waves. Like the waves in this bed sheet kind of force you to go all the way across. And this by the way, spans 2 pages. And there's like another panel down below it. So you go through this whole thing before the main character, you kind of move on to the next part of the story. This heavy off-weighting forces you to go through the whole panel. And you can use negative space. Negative space always creates a big pause. You go to this big black area before you go to the character down here. If it was centered only on the character, you lose some of that pause. Also, it creates a sense of weight. Negative space above a character creates a sense of pushing down, of weight, and that also adds tension. And you can also use the length of a balloon's tail. So the tail itself, we have these two characters dancing together, best friends, they're smiling, and me too. There's this big pause. We see their expression before we hear the dialogue, which is really important because sometimes you want to see seeing the art, seeing that moment of joy, and then the delivery, me too. We get this feeling of them dancing and they're happy, and then me too. Like that's delivery. Or on the right, he shouldn't be. Exactly. Like notice how the dialogue, these two balloons are side by side, but the tails are long. So what the effect is here is you read the dialogue, he shouldn't be, exactly, and then there's a pause, and then you see the characters hanging out side by side. Love it. Like it keeps you from going immediately to the next panel. It makes you linger in this panel just that little bit longer. Everyone keeping up? I'm actually going faster than I thought. That's good. We'll have time for Q&A. So camera and framing. So I'm not going to be able to go all the way into camera because camera is a very large topic. We could spend a whole 8 hours just talking about how to use camera to create tension effects in your story. But I'm going to cover some bases, and I'm going to give you guys a link as well because I actually wrote an essay and an article on this on my website that is specifically just about camera actions that you can use in your comics and what those actions do in creating tension in your stories. So let's kind of run through some of the basics and then we'll get into framing. Though camera and framing are complex enough to warrant their own discussions, it is enough to realize that they can be utilized to increase tension in a scene. So we're back here. We're back here for a reason. And that's when we saw him. So camera here is straight on. All these characters, there's no like fancy angles, but the framing. Look at the framing in this. And that's when we saw him. This is frame clipping, by the way. We're gonna actually get more into this. But when a character's sort of faces are cut off, or when some of the action is cut off, you get this feeling of something mysterious. Like the reader has to kind of fill in what's going on with the rest of it. Like we don't see their mouths. And so it immediately creates tension because the reader doesn't see everything that's happening with these characters. We're only getting this small portion, right? And then we have this character pulled out shot, the bear with this sort of like the basket on his back. So look at how this is a straight on angle. Now, next page. Love this. Suddenly, camera looking down. It's like we're the bear, who's very tall. He's got this big looming shadow sort of falling over these boys. And it's a slightly down angle, which makes it feel menacing. They feel very tiny suddenly because the camera angle has tilted up. We have diminished these two characters by making our camera angle high, showing the perspective from a high angle looking down. But then the next panel, we switch to the boy's perspective. We're looking back up at this bear and he's towering up. And suddenly, because we shift the angle up, we create a feeling of menace and of intimidation. These two camera angles are probably the two most important camera angles you can learn in comics for creating different types of tension, which is intimidation tension, or feeling like something is intimidating the character versus making a character feel small and feel sort of minute, right? Like they're powerless and out of control. So the up angle, the down angle. And this continues. Oh, you mean this old thing? They reach up and then we get this tight in. Suddenly we're really in on the character, tight in on this bear. He's got a scowl on his face. We're starting to get a little exaggeration in his features, but not too much. Is it not obvious? Like it's this, almost like his snout is at such an angle, it's like distorted, right? Extreme tension here. The tension is building. We're starting at a slight angle and then we get really deep in on the character. So we're actually increasing tension from panel to panel. And then we go, a terrifying thought came to me at that moment. What if that basket of his was full of kids? And this is great. Like we go back to this side shot of the two characters and suddenly we switch into melodramatic. Look at the characters' faces in these following scenes. The main character is imagining what is inside of this basket, and he's imagining it's full of kids. One, it changes to red. Red to show danger, but also to show that this is to indicate to the reader that this is an imagination, not reality. So any color would have actually worked here to distort reality. That was as long as it's color outside of the normal palette, but the red specifically makes it feel dangerous. And then this face, like you see the teeth and the scowl and their faces, like this extreme exaggeration on everyone's faces turns comedic. I love how this excessive action, it deliberately exaggerates the imagining and the humorous. So there's a lot of really good stuff going on here in acting, in camera, and in framing. So specifically for camera, for more about camera effects tension, go to on my website. You can actually just Google camera conventions and graphic novels. You will find it on the internet. It'll be there. If someone wants to Google it and put it in the chat, because I don't have the link here right now. I'll put it in the chat later if someone doesn't. But I have a whole long article. I've actually left a few things off because I need to update it, but you'll get a good idea on there. Ah, someone put it in there. Thank you, Zena. Zena or Xenia. So what about frames? Because we don't have time for camera. Frames with a highly offset height width ratio also create feelings of high tension. Now, what do I mean by that? Right? Well, long and narrow or tall and narrow. When you have panels that have where the length versus the width is at high odds, high ratio, right? Like there's a very short versus very long. You get a feeling of tension. It is just like inherent in the shape of the panel. Square panels have a sense, or even just small, simple, kind of rectangular panels have a sense of sort of stasis. There's just kind of sitting. When you create very narrow panels, however, or very tall and long, it gives the panel a sense of motion. You actually feel like movement, and because it feels slightly unnatural, a sense of being like squeezed in. And because it's clipping the characters, a sense of mystery. So this spread here, I love this spread because it's such a good example of long, 4 panels, and tall. And what's happening here is the main character, Freddie, has had a falling out with her best friend. And you don't know yet why that is, but there's tension between these two characters. And what's great is the acting is the characters are acting pretty normal. In the foreground, you have Freddie talking to her girlfriend, Laura Dean, who's a butthead. And they're also sort of notice how they're toned in gray to offset them from foreground. And in the background, positioning, right? This is acting. We've positioned Freddie's best friend next to her other 2 friends. They're looking a little awkward, but it's understated, right? And then the best friend sitting by themselves, then looking up, and then suddenly that friend's disappeared, right? And these panels are a really good way to reflect that feeling of tension. But the positioning too, these very tall, narrow panels, the 2 characters are turned away from each other, right? And there's almost this line, and the clipping creates a feeling of like they are ignoring each other in a space where they shouldn't be able to ignore each other, right? They're in the cafeteria. And when you frame a panel to be very narrow and very tight, you force, especially if you have a lot of characters, right? We're forcing these characters into a tight space and they're ignoring each other. Like creates all this amazing tension. And again, like the negative space in this panel right here over these 2 characters creates a beat, creates a pause. The negative space when they're at their lockers creates another beat, another pause, more tension, right? Wonderful examples. And frames that clip part of the action. We talked about frame clipping, right? Also creates tension. So, holy shit, when did this happen? A while ago. Notice how we don't see this character's face. One, she's turned away from the camera, which is another part of acting. Turning the character away from the camera and not seeing their face can be a really effective method for increasing tension because it creates mystery, because it engages the reader in trying to understand what that person's really feeling. And when they do that, readers tend to impress their own feelings on that character. It's an amazing sort of psychological phenomenon when you turn characters away from the camera. But you can also do that with clipping. We've clipped off part of the character's face deliberately in this frame And the same thing's happening. We don't see the character's face, so we're left to imagine it. And think of it too, when we feel really highly intense emotions that we're trying to hide from, right? Or hide from other people, we have a tendency to hide our face. And that's often like we're feeling overwhelmed. And that feeling of being overwhelmed when we use clipping, when we turn a character away from the camera, tends to transfer to the reader. So they tend to feel those emotions in that scene a lot more intensely. It's a wonderful reflection. Oops. Yeah. Also, staggered frames. Again, some Laura Dean. Lots of staggered frames on this one. You have the character. I showed you this first panel earlier with this pause right at the top, thinking, and then mine. The staggered frame is kind of an interesting effect. You don't see this a lot in comics, but I see it enough that I thought was really important to point out, and I'd love to see more of it, because when you stagger a frame, there's almost this kind of sense of like what happens when you have to tell someone something, or when you hear something that literally makes your stomach drop out of the bottom of your seat. Have you ever had that feeling before? I feel like it's kind of that same sensation. It's a feeling of like, oof, like when you're about to fall asleep and you skip a little, like you've fallen and you've caught yourself. It's a really interesting sort of dramatic effect that you can utilize. You don't have to, but I wanted to put that one out there for you guys to potentially think about when you're designing your comics. So even small frames versus large frames can affect tension. Small frames give a sense of quickness and urgency. Large frames a sense of timelessness. Very small frames beside or within very large frames give a greater sense of emotional contrast. So I'm talking about frame contrast here. Love this spread from Blankets by Craig Thompson. So we have this scene, large panel, where the dad to this girl, Rena, has walked into the room and he comes upon Craig in bed, naked, with his daughter. And this very big, large panel makes this a very emotional scene. Even like the stretching of the shadow here towards them gives this feeling of like a little ominous, but also a little surreal, and this big lingering moment. It's a large panel, so you want to linger on the frame a little more. And then followed by these very small frames where the dad is confused, angry, thinking, and about to talk. Notice how these are very quick actions. And then this sort of large but still medium-sized panel. Look at the length of this balloon that ends in silence. And then we see Craig and Raina. And then this last big panel, notice it's a panel within a panel. We focus on his daughter's face, who's smiling. Her dad probably hasn't seen her smile in forever. He's been going through a lot of stress. He's going through potentially divorce with his wife. They have their own foster children that they've adopted. There's a lot of stress in this family, and Raina's had to shoulder a lot of the burden of this family on her shoulders. And for once, she looks happy. And I'll tell you, like, the scene that follows this is also just as beautiful, where he kind of just closes the door and walks away. But look at this page, right? This page just has a beautiful layout. What I love is the contrast of the panels. This big panel, when he walks in, that as he's walking in, it's kind of like a punch to the gut, is what it would be like seeing this. And then these short little panels where we kind of release and build tension, like, what is he going to do? We feel like, is he going to get angry? And then this large panel where we sort of let this pause, a long pause, and then this clinching in of the panel. It's just like this constant play on tension. I feel tense through this whole thing, and I feel like I'm feeling the tension that he has. And the size of the panels makes a difference. If all these panels were just the same size panels, and they were all, kind of roughly all similarly sized, you would read this at a different pace. When you read a panel that's large and takes longer, it slows your pace down. It makes you linger on that emotion, on that feeling of that panel. When you make the panel small, you change the pace. So think about music, a long note followed by a lot of very short notes. Humans are drawn to contrast. We are naturally drawn to contrast, whether it's in seeing in black and white, right? Seeing the differences in contrast, physical contrast, whether it's in music, whether it's in just tempo. I mean, it's kind of inherent to who we are as creatures. We are drawn to contrast. We're contrast in highs and lows, emotional highs and lows, right? And that's kind of the point of this whole discussion, actually, is to create contrasts. If you want to control and meter the dramatic tension in your stories, think of contrast, think of emotional contrast, think of the contrast of your balloons, your dialogue, think of the contrast between your characters, right? Your primary character and the secondary characters. Think of the contrast in acting, like a good range of emotions, right? So let's put it all together. This is our final. We're wrapping up now. In comics, the eye follows a path through dialogue and art, across panels and pages, through gutters and spreads. Be aware of how that path affects character tone and builds or releases tension in its delivery. Now, we're going to come back. We're coming back to this because I want to do a little example with some annotations. I want to point I want to go through these panels with you guys again. We read it originally kind of in your heads, right? But now we've kind of learned about panel sizes. We've learned a bit more about dialogue balloons, the length, design, right? We've talked about the script, the acting, design. So I want to go through these pages and actually break them down and look at the way that they are designed. Give me a second and hide. Nope. There we go. Okay, I'm gonna make sure I can annotate for y'all. There we go. Can y'all see that? And then after this, we're gonna go into Q&A. Excellent. All right. There might be a little lag occasionally, hopefully not. Clear all drawings. All right. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna draw the line that our eye will typically follow. Most people's eyes, not everyone. People, just because we're different as human beings, people read things differently. We're drawn to different things, right? But I'm going to draw a little dot every time there's a pause. Okay, so I'm going to draw the line showing how the eye follows through the page. I'm going to draw a dot every time there's a pause. So we start here, we flow, we pause, flow, and there's actually a little pause here. And then sometimes you might go this way. Some people might go that way. Some people might go that way. You can go either way. Go here and then here. We do a little pause here on the eye. We are very drawn to eyes. Humans are wired for faces. Yep. And then here, we're actually drawn to negative space. Here, eyes again, and mouth, right? Through here, a little more negative space. There's a lot of deliberate negative space in Laura Dean. And that's kind of why I wanted to use this example so much. And then something interesting happens here. There's negative space. We kind of like almost go around to here. We have a big tendency, and partly we have this framing here. This beautiful gray frame actually forces our eye in a little bit of a circle, which creates a really big dramatic pause. Yeah. And then we tend to go here, down here. I love how the face is leading into the gutter, by the way. I have a tendency to face my characters from left to right or in the direction that I want people to read. Because we have a tendency to look in the direction that a character is looking. This isn't always going to be true in comics, but notice that like here, Freddie looking back over her shoulder, it looks like she's looking back because she's looking that way, away from the edge, the forward edge of the page. Of course, in manga, this would be reversed. So let's continue. We always go up a gutter. And the hair, look at this balloon. And we kind of look at her hand a little bit. We're drawn to hands. And then eyes. We linger on these eyes. Those are a very large, expressive face. So we're going to linger on this mouth and this face for a bit. Pause. This is a big pause, by the way. And then look at how this leads us back down, by the way. The sort of frame of her shirt. And then it goes here. Eye looking up. And then you might go this way or you might go that way. it can change the way it reads a little. Looking at her eye, her hair actually forces us to an extra pause. The black space here kind of makes us linger, go through, so. And then instead of exiting this way, her body actually makes us exit this way, which creates an extra pause. But then also, look at these frames. Long and narrow, stress, long and narrow, stress. There's this extra stress pause here, right? Tension pause by adding an extra panel. We give her an extra beat. And then, let me delete these. Gotta, there we go. I've done this a few times. Just glad it's not my first time. Alrighty, so I love this is a 2-page spread, and this spread, man, this spread's magic. You enter in, we usually enter in at the top left corner. It's the way we're trained. We look at humans. We tend to read a page the way we read a human. When a human's standing upright, we look at the face, we look at the eyes, the nose, the mouth, and we look down. So we often tends to start at the top because people start at the top, right? So, and we see this like this gray space to the white. This white actually leads our eye down. Do you want to break up with me? And then there's like, your eye probably is going to wander through this whole page. There's so much space on this page that it forces you to really wander and to linger, which makes, do you want to break up with me? This incredibly dramatic, tense moment. It's a wonderful use of a 2-page spread. Then, last but not least, also notice the space between the two. I love that. There's emotional distance, therefore there is physical distance between the two. And then look how we end up bridging it on the next page. I can get it to go to the next page. There we go. Last page. So, negative space pause. Eyes. Oh, this is a good expression. This is expressive expression because the character is really debating. You can see her debating in her head. What the hell do I want to say? She hasn't broken up with her girlfriend. It's always her girlfriend breaking up with her. Negative space pause. Negative space pause. Eyes looking up. She's looking back, right? This way. This is awesome. Like the characters are always kind of facing each other within this temporal space. And then magnet. And then we like linger. This is a really big pause here. This is what I was talking about earlier with centering something creates this big magnet effect. And then finally, we leave. Nice big pause here because of white space. The eye, we don't linger too long because this kind of directs us. The frame of the hair directs us back, down. And then here, and then we see the hand, the eye, the ear. We kind of linger in this panel a while. Notice how the character's bridging the gap. And here, here, here. Love the way this dialogue's delivered by the length of the tails, right? Notice too, gray, dark gray, medium gray, white. We're going from a heavy emotion to a lighter emotion, sort of like forgiveness, right? And then character, hair, hand, exit the page. So you might have read these a little differently, right? And also, I do want to point something else out. Notice how some of the tension panels are repeated sizes, beats. This is very effective at building tension, right? We are building one particular emotion. Using same panel sizes in sequence, especially with a fixed camera position, gives a feeling of building tension, right? Building on the emotion that you're focused on, right? So here's surprise. What is she going to think? Over here is whatever Laura Dean is saying. So let me delete this. And oh, we did good on time. It's 7:20. There's time for Q&A. Da, da, da. So all of that said, Q&A. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And screen sharing stopped. Alrighty, so y'all should see me still. And I'm going to take questions. So if you would like to ask the question directly, you're more than welcome to raise your hand, or you can ask it in the chat. I just need to get the chat up. Give me a second. Here we go. And I don't think you guys were quiet during this. I hope it was because everything was interesting and there was a lot to learn. I tend to move fairly quickly. Yes, thankfully this is recorded. I rely on things being recorded so you can go back. And just so you know, there's if you go back to the recording, you can also see every book that I referenced, who wrote it, who illustrated it, what the book name was. If you want to see it in more detail, it will be on the recording. So I hope you'll learn something. Oh, so Jesse. Oh, good question. Do you have any exercises you suggest for cartoonists to practice or increase tension in their comics? Honestly, a lot of what I like to do is very kind of, I like to analyze books. Something that I do in my classes is I have my students find, like, open up, just go through a comic, go through a whole chapter, right, of one of your favorite comics, and actually trace what's going on, but like really loosely. So like trace the panels, trace the balloons, but don't write in the dialogue, right? So use that a lot for like, how does layout actually affect the story? It's a good way to learn layout because we have a tendency when we're just reading a comic to get really swept up in the moment. And it's very easy to forget to note. So I reread comics all the time because I like to read it for the first time, just enjoy it. And then I go back and like, okay, I'm just going to focus on the dialogue. And then I read the comic just for the dialogue. And then I'm like, oh, I'm just going to focus on the characters. So I go through and I read it for the characters. And oh, I'm just going to focus on like the panels. That's why I use Laura Dean a lot, is because it's got really, really great panel layouts. I've spent a lot of time analyzing them and noticing them. I use similar techniques in my comics. And it's, yeah, really intense note taking is what it is. And honestly, like experimenting. I mean, I can't, making short comics, playing with tone, um, trying to go for melodrama. Like, I had a couple examples for you guys, and at the early on with like the aliens blowing things up and then the person, everything dying. That was like an exercise there because like, okay, how much more dramatic can I make it? And then they can go like, just do a simple series of panels. So you're just like, how dramatic can I make it? Can I make it humorous? Can I make it melodramatic, right? Or do I want it to be realistic? And like I storyboard comics, I always storyboard out first because when I'm laying out my comics, I actually put I write the script first, but I like to put the dialogue on the page and I very loosely put in panels. And I do that before I do any drawing because you can feel the beat of the story based upon the placement of the balloons. Like it's a really good way to feel that this more space between um, dialogue, the more that bigger that pause is, right? So if I know I want the character to deliver their lines very quickly, I put the dialogue very, very close together on the page. And then I like design around there. And it's a good way for me to kind of like look at the page and at a very rough stage and feel what the story is like. And then I can play with it from there. You added comics to your to buy list. Yes, please buy them all. See, Zena says, loved everything you talked about. I've been wanting to write a comic with mystery and drama, a murder mystery specifically. But when would you say is an appropriate time for relief, especially comedic relief? Oh my God. So that is definitely something I think you need to decide on. It depends, right? So what type of comedic relief are you going for? Are you going for a joke relief, right? Then that's the time when you want to find it in the script, right? So I like comedic relief right after you've built some sort of uncomfortable tension. But there's so many different types of comedy. There's pun comedy. There is uncomfortable comedy. I like uncomfortable comedy. I like dark humor. But it is after a tension point, right? Usually you want that melodrama, the comedy, after you've built up intensity on like the same emotion, like the someone's died, and then you find out like it just kind of keeps building. They keep getting information, and it keeps getting worse and worse and worse, and then suddenly it's just like over the top, or it's a complete inverse of whatever they've just found out. um Puns I can't help you with. I'm terrible at puns. I don't know anything puns. Sam says, study the Knives Out movies. They do it really well. I agree with that. There was really good timing in Knives Out and Glass Onion. There's great comedic delivery. It really is the delivery. Mark Twain wrote an essay about American humor. I will say there's a little bit of offensive language in it because it is written in the era of time of Mark Twain. But if you look at Mark Twain's, I think it's on humor, he talks all about how timing is what makes American humor. It's like you can have humor that's wit. It's like that's very British, right? It's make something a witty statement, this long meandering story, and then there's a funny aha moment. And then there's a lot of American humor, which you see in comedy, which is this sort of there's a pause right before the delivery because you let your reader, your audience sort of expect what's about to be said. You lead them to an expectation and then you turn it on its head. But you start with a pause. There's a pause, you wait, the audience builds up, and you can do that with panels. You can add a panel, a space, you can add space in it before any delivery, and then you just create a turn, a twist, right? That's unexpected, and that can be humorous and melodramatic. Let's see. Moderator. Let's see. Joan says, I don't think I got this one from Sam. Do I have any advice on making tension for horror? Oh my God. A camera device that I left out. It's funny because I'm not a horror fan, but I do love, is it Junji Ito? Who wrote Spiral, an illustrated Spiral. I have a great admiration for horror because it scares me. I don't read a lot of it because I get scared easily. Also with it. But yes, a lot of horror too is in camera angles. A lot of low camera angles build tension, right? There's also something called a Dutch angle where you kind of turn the camera slightly on its side. I believe that was developed for Psycho, but it might have been something else. Alfred Hitchcock era is when it was developed, but look up Dutch angle. um, there's a lot of pause, right, in developing horror. You kind of want to build things out. You want your audience to feel like, show them a clip, like when we're talking about clipped frames, like maybe you're about to do a reveal, but you see just like a hand covered in spiders, and that's it. But then you pan out to somebody like the mom dead on the floor, gushing blood or whatever, or the bloody eyeball, right? You want to tease at what's to come with one of those tension pauses, maybe a little bit of clipping. If you want to use an angle, it can be straight on, however you want, and then shoot to the reveal. Tension pauses are great for that. Jesse says, do you have any recommendations for this cycle of tension and release in very, very short comics, like 2, 4, 6, or 8-page micros for anthologies? Jesse, I'm gonna be honest, this is one of the reasons I find very short comics very difficult, because I think in tension, and I do think it's tricky to build tension in that short of a frame, but I don't think it's impossible. So something you might do is juxtaposition, like that panel from Bloom, right, where you showed in the foreground was the people making merry, and the background was the main character looking melancholy, right? So juxtaposition could be a really good way to create that emotional variability, or have in the background sort of outside characters who offer an emotional contrast to the main character, even a setting. Like, let's say you're going for a melancholic feeling, but you decide to make the setting like this very happy place, or vice versa. Maybe it's a very melancholy setting. It's night, the full moon is out, and the main character is frolicking, but then it's like horror, right? Because you have this contrast between setting, which creates an expectation, and the way the character is acting. They create a contrast that makes the reader feel tension, because okay, this character is not acting the way that the setting is telling me it's going, right? Do that a lot in horror, right? We have revelers in this haunted house. It's like they always seem to be really happy. A lot of the times, like, it's always like drunk kids who are falling over and like way too loud in these really scary houses, because I think it's the contrast that creates a greater sense of tension. Zena says, I feel the pause is such a great tool. The way you broke down the comics you used helped me really observe them even better. That's great. These are all tools. You don't have to use every tool, right? These are just ways to get you brainstorming. Tally, I've been playing Claire Obscure Expedition 33 and marveling over how they do absurd humor mixed with huge drama to work the tension this past week. Very French humor. I'm going to check that out. Thank you for that recommendation. I love the absurd. Um, I find it hard to write myself because I have a hard time kind of like pushing my characters that far. I tend to focus more on realism. I do a lot of magical realism and things are kind of like, you know, they're magical. So I have a deep admiration for those who can push the absurd because that's you want that melodrama. That melodrama makes it fun. And it does, like you say, it makes it absurd. Sam says, make it slow yet inevitable. Yes, I love the inevitable. A good way to introduce the inevitable is story seeds, the smoking gun. If you want something to feel inevitable, make sure you hint at that inevitability very early in the story, right? So if the character is going to eventually have a tragedy with green dye on their hair, then maybe early in the story, there's a bottle of green dye somewhere that's, sitting out, or maybe just some like hair dye, like hinting at it, or maybe there's a color green that's sort of infusing the background. Like you want to hint at something that's going to be inevitable. It's up to you how obvious you want to make it, right? Like the smoking gun dilemma is if you show a gun that's loaded in the first scene, then someone's got to shoot off that gun later in the scene. You can put the gun front and center in the camera, or you can shove it to the background. And that is a matter of preference and of taste. Do you prefer to be subtle, which I think is more realistic, or like an Easter egg, right? Do you like to make your people hunt for it? Or do you want to make it really obvious? And I feel like the obvious is usually where you get more comedic humor. You want to make things obvious, I feel, with humor. And more realistic, it tends to be more subtle. Zena says the Devil Wears Prada constantly has close calls with cars to hit at a later car accident. Yes, I love that. Jesse, do you have suggestions for editing your comics to increase the tension? Like I know for writers, they often do passes like one round for dialogue, one round for proofreading, one round for description, etc. I'm curious if there are any comic specific approaches too. To me, a lot of that is in the layouts. I think it can be very difficult if you've already drawn the comic to play with tension, because I really feel that a lot of the tension is in the acting and delivery and the layout. And so I think it's really good when you're laying out your comics to start really, really, really loose. The graphic novel I'm working on now is 640 pages, and I laid out every single page before I started drawing it. I laid out the dialogue, I laid out the panels, because I feel like the panels really flow. And the next thing that I do is I go and I draw in really loose shapes for the characters, and the balloons and everything. And I think that's that point where you're going to most play with tension. Tension is so much of it is found in those layouts. It can be really hard to generate more tension by increasing the character's expressiveness, right? Or by making the art itself more dramatic. That's why we didn't talk about art. Art can be dramatic, but you can make a scene dramatic with stick figures too. And so I try to avoid relying on the art alone to create that dramatic tension. So if you're already at a point where it's already drawn, maybe it's time to start a new story. But yeah, it's in that first rough stage, right? Where you really want to kind of play with tension. And Zena, I have to skedaddle, but thank you so much for your time. I learned a lot, and this was inspiring too. This was wonderful, you guys. I hope you learned a lot. Learned something, at least. I wish I could see your faces and talk to you. Because it's like I did a rapport with my class, and so we do a lot of back and forth, and it's always a little weird talking to an empty wall. It would feel like an empty wall, but y'all are there, so I really appreciate those of y'all who talked up, who spoke out in the chat. Especially thank you, Jesse, thank you, Zena, thank you, Sam, thank you, Tally, thank you, everyone who spoke up, and thank you, everyone, just for being here. I hope you learned a lot, and I guess that's it. Oh, from one teacher to another. Thank you, Tally. Jesse says, thank you. It's reassuring to know that we take a long amount of time to build up the layout and everything before getting into the details is so helpful. Yeah, I spend the most amount of time on layout. Layout's tricky, man. It's for your voices. All right, everyone. I hope you have a great evening and happy Mother's Day to those of you who are mothers, who have mothers, or many mothers, or know a mother. I'm sure you know somebody. So my little boy is waiting out there. So love you all. Bye.
Thanks so much, everybody, for coming out. Rivka, thank you so much for hosting. Uh, yeah, thank you so much for another amazing week of Nib and Inkfest events. I hope everybody makes sure to come back around for our third weekend of Nib and Inkfest events coming up next weekend. I can speak for our little webcomic block that we have coming up next week. You don't want to miss some of the amazing stuff we have coming up. It's gonna be a real exciting time, and can't wait to talk about stuff with webcomic collectives, RSS and you, the making of a webcomic, and transformative fan comics all coming up next Saturday. Uh, don't miss it, y'all. We will
See
see
you all
you on
next
the
week.
internet.
I'm excited. I can't wait. Got so many more events to go. It's awesome. All right. Bye, Joan. Bye, everyone.
Bye.